Today we are going to recreate this where we're using some GLSL and we are adjusting points in space and building off our little image that we did before and kind of doing some different things and using some noises and some other things. So let's get right into it. And so we are going to take this base and I'm going to close this out. And we are going to add another base. I'm going to name this example 2. Well, let's get right into it. So go inside our base and start adding some things. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an add SOP. And I'm going to go into this add SOP and add points. After this, I am going to add a convert. I'm going to connect these two nodes, go into convert, and change the convert to 2 particles per point. And at the end of this, I am going to add a null. And then we're going to build out our geometry network. So right-clicking, selecting comp, select geometry, double-click, select camera, double-click, select a render, and we're not going to use a light, so we are going to use a material and we're going to use a constant. We're going to drag this onto our geo and farm our material and start building our system. So the other thing too is we are going to then add a constant and we are going to create our little resolution file. So resx to plus res y. Oops. I'm going to do 512 for these. And I'm going to name this res. I'm going to hit C on my keyboard and select black. Just as a reference for me because I like black. And we are going to then start doing some things with these points, right? So what we're going to do and what we talked about in class is we're going to add a GLSL. And in our GLSL, we have to edit this because we want to make this a UV. And we want to make this UV so we can adjust the points in space. So if we hit this little plus button, we go on in here, and on line 9, we are going to edit where this vec4 is, and we are going to type in v uv dot st comma 0 comma. And when we do that, we click away, we have our little UV map. And we're going to close out these because we don't need to see them anymore. And so we're going to start adding other parts to our little network here. So the first thing we're going to do is add a noise because noises are awesome, right? So then we're going to add a composite. So we're gonna composite these noises and the GLSL UV map. Then we're going to create this, and we're going to do this as an add. We're going to go into our noise and adjust some settings. So I'm going to take the period down, take the offset down. I'm going to take the harmonics down, and I'm going to change this to 7.5. And I think that's good for now. And we're going to kind of build this out a little bit and go from there. So we're going to also, at the end of this, add a null. And we are going to call this null instance because, whoa, too many S's. Because guess what? We're going to instance this point in space and to start doing that, right? So when we go into our geo, We're going to select instance, and we're going to turn instancing on. We are going to take this and reference this for our translate. And then we are going to translate the X and the R, the Y and the G, and the Z in the B. So we have our little cube in 3D space off our noise, our GLSL, our GLSL, and kind of work it that way, right? So what I showed a little bit in class in this example was we're going to use our images, or the drawings I created, and whatever images you want to use. So we're going to reference our little in our resources for the class, we're going to reference this movie player talks that I created and put in the resources under week 11. So I'm going to drag that on over here. And it has an X because it's looking for a folder that it can't see. So I'm going to select a folder. I'm going to select the images that I want. And bam, the images are there, right? And so we have to go in there, and we're going to do some editing in there in a little bit. We can turn our seconds on, our minutes on, and some of the custom components and things that we made. But we're going to be changing some stuff in there. So I'm just going to leave this alone for right now. But one thing I want to do is change this resolution to 512 by 512. So we are in our square format matching the ones above. And start going from there. So I have this res up here, and what I want to make sure is that some things are going to stay the same as we reference this color, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to break it first so you can see what I mean. So I'm going to reference this out, and I'm going to call this color. And in our instancing, we're going to go to tab instance 2. I'm going to drag this over to color. I'm going to select the R. I'm going to select the G. I'm going to select the B. And what happened? So the geo broke. It has a little red X, which means can't understand what's happening. It says all OPs must generate the same number of instances, have the same length. There we go. So it doesn't. Because if we go into our GLSL, look at this, our resolution is 256 by 256, and this is 512. So this is what we got here. This is why I made this, right? So we're going to go in here. We're going to chop reference this. We're going to chop reference this. We're going to go into our noise, go into our commons, chop reference this, chop reference this, and there you go. It is now fixed. So that's great. And so we have our image, and you can see it's pushing through in 3D space, this little cube, which is pretty cool. But we want to do more with it, right? So first we can go into our noise, and if we go into transform and we do our little absolute time, so ABS time dot seconds. I'm going to do divided by 2 because I don't want it to go too fast. It is then kind of switching our noise, but you really can't see anything because it's switching it, but it's still seeing itself, right? So we're going to do some other adjustments in that. That's where we're going to build something in our little feedback. So you can see, like with my amplitude and stuff like that, I'm adjusting this out. It's changing how our picture is pushing in space, right? And we're going to automate some of this, and we're going to do that with some audio analysis. So hit play on this. You can see, because that's why we weren't seeing it before, is because I hit the space bar. So always good reminder, if you're not seeing things work, just remember that you might have hit the space bar. And so that's why images and things were not playing. So lesson learned many times. Remember, that if you hit the spacebar, everything stops. If you press the spacebar, things go. Okay, so we have our things happening here. And so we want to make this a little bit automated and kind of go from there, right? So first we're going to, like I said, we're going to add a little feedback in here. So we are going to add a feedback chop, or feedback top. And we're going to drag this into that. And let's see, let's reorganize our network a little bit here, make some room for some of this stuff. I take these and slide them over. And I'm going to add what is called a cross. I'm going to take this, I'm going to take this into this, I'm going to take this, drop it in there. I'm going to reconnect these nodes, and there we go. So stuff is set, right? But the feedback has to reference something, so it has to have its target top. So we're going to make the feedback target top this cross. So once you drag it on it, it will then reference it, or you could drag it up there. But it's kind of seeing what's going on there, right? And so this is where we need to like start to make some things to adjust our feedback. So one of the things I'm going to do is I am going to add in an audio file in. And those that are familiar with this audio file, if you put the little speaker and listen to it, it's the TouchDesigner default music. And that is all great, but I don't feel like listening to it right now. So I am going to go to my open palette because I'm going to grab an audio analysis. And I'm just using this as a reference file because through the chain we can add our own music and different things like that, right? So audio analysis, drag these, connect these, slide these over, and make some room. And on top of this, I'm going to add two selects. So I'm going to take this select, copy and paste it. And for the first select, I want to pick up the kick. And for the second select, I want to pick up the snare. And so what we have to do in here now is we hit the plus button. We're going to turn on the kick and turn on the snare. So now we have two different things that are going to be adjusting. And we are going to go into our feedback, and we are going to take this kick, and we are going to plus this over the reset button. And you can kind of see in here a little bit, it's bouncing to the kick. We're going to alter that, but we're just starting out, right? So it's doing a little bit of a feedback bump on here. And that is all great, but we're going to add some other things. And I guess what we probably should do here, so you guys can kind of see what's going on, is I'm going to add a null way out here. Name this BG. I'll turn this on so we can start to reference where we are in space and start to look at things that way. Okay. So in our movie file player, we are doing some different things, but I want to edit this, right? So this is always the great thing of we start out with a node, it's doing some things, or a little base container. And we were switching this based on the clock of the seconds and the minutes and the switches that I made in the custom component to adjust it. But I want to switch it up. And so right now it's switching per second. So I want to take any time that a snare comes in and have that adjust how it's going to alter the pictures, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a select. I'm going to split my screen. I'm going to go out of this network over here, and I'm going to pick up this select 2, which is snare. I'm going to drag that over here, and now I'm picking up my snare file. So this is how I do a lot of my networks, where I'm always copying in and outside of my networks. So you can see this is the reference down there. I could have brought an in node here and just drag this, but I like to kind of clean some of my things up. and just a little bit of housekeeping with things like that. So I'm selecting something, I'm going to use it somewhere else. So I'm going to go back out of here. We're going to go back in our network, and we're going to start to alter this little chain here. So I don't need my clock anymore. I don't need the switch anymore. I am going to keep my rename because it is being referenced down the chain here. And this is where we have to kind of make some room for things and add some other things, right? So I'm going to select this, or move this clock over, get some room. And what I'm going to do is I am going to add a count. So I want any time that this snare hits, right now it's just going to rename, you can barely see something, but I want basically any time it hits to start counting. And this is going to adjust like how many snare hits are actually going to alter something, right? So snares are going to hit often, so I don't want my pictures to always switch every time a snare hits. So I'm going to kind of, you know, massage these a little bit and add some different things into them, right? So the biggest thing is reference these counts and some other things to do, like, okay, what am I going to add? Right. And the other thing too is I have this limit on here, which is basically, again, being referenced in this select of what's going on here, but I don't need this anymore. So I'm going to take this and delete it. And it broke everything in here, but that's okay. Right. So we're going to kind of redo a little bit of this. So I'm going to add a logic. And after my logic, I am going to add another count. Okay. And in these, I'm going to start to, again, then reference these things. So counts coming in, and I want to take this count, and I want to basically add a reference to where these are in these selects. So I'm going to take this select, I'm going to go over here and do copy parameter. And then I am going to go into my count and select loop min max and put this as paste reference. So right now you can see it's counting up, and every time it counts up, it is going to then count to how many files I have in this folder right over here. And so I'm going to reset this. So I'm just going to pulse it so my numbers are normal. Right? And it's switching. And it's switching like based on the count, but I'm just going to do some other things to add in there because I want this to kind of be a little bit cleaner. And you can see it's kind of airing out because it doesn't know what to do, because this count's still like counting away. So I have to go into this count, do the same thing, go clamp min max, and I am going to then reference that same thing. So just to show you again, I'm going to go here. I'm going to do copy parameter. So I'm going to this count. I'm going to go limit min max, and I'm going to go paste reference. So now it is doing this, and it is selecting, and it's going to select between this 0 and 5 as this logic goes. But I haven't adjusted anything in the logic yet, right? So what is the logic doing? It's just sending something, and it needs to kind of like fix a little bit of what's happening. So in my logic, I'm going to turn the convert in to off when outside of bounds, right? And when I do that, I need to set some boundaries here. So I'm going to also switch this to invert. So it's only going to, at a certain point, pick up this bound. So anytime it's going between 0 and 1, it's doing an invert. But there isn't like data here yet. So I need to do the same thing I did again, is go into here, select this end of row, hit copy parameter, go into my logic, and then do paste reference. right? So now it's doing a paste reference. It's selecting it. And it's just like counting away, but it doesn't really understand because if you see the count, it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's never pushing to this logic to add to this count. So the reason for that is it's going to 5 and it's looking for 5, but these numbers, the 5 and the zeros and the ones in the TouchDesigner, don't really understand what's happening, right? So I have to do a little bit of something in here. And off of my OP select 1, power reference row index, I am going to then put -1. Right, so every time it hits that last value, then it's going to be pushing. So it's going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then push. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then push, right? And the biggest thing in here too is it's looking for this, and it's just like, again, it doesn't really understand what's happening. So I have to kind of like pulse this to kind of reset in TouchDesigner to understand like where things are. So I kind of like started this, and then I kind of broke the chain, and then I just have to always remember to then again reset it, right? So as it's going through here, it's doing it, but it's not always going through here, because first of all, I have clamp min max, and I want to have loop min max. So it will then pulse through, and then it will repeat itself and then start to switch. Okay. So I wanted to show you a couple of these things, just as like, as you're looking for things and you're wondering like why things aren't switching or what they do. And it's just kind of like paying attention to these settings, right? So clamping is going to clamp it. It's going to do its thing, and then it's going to be done. But so what I wanted to do is make it so it will then eventually switch. Okay. So every time we have our snare hits, it is then counting through this. It is then pushing it into our logic. We're looking for our logic, and we're saying in these boundaries. So once it really hits 5, doing some weird math, then it's going to push something. It's going to then create this secondary count. This secondary count is then going to go through and hit this value. Okay. As you see, it also starts out at count 0, right? Which is 0 is name. And the name is through our paths of our folders and all the rest of the stuff. So we can go into our count. We can change this to 1. And then it's going to skip that first name. So it's just going to count through the rest of them. And then it's going to be like a little bit more even as we position through. Okay. So we can go out of this, and now we have something that we are going to then reference, and it's kind of switching through. And it's doing that based on any time a snare hits, that it is going to, or a snare hits in a certain amount, then switch what the image is going to be projected up there, right? So a couple more things what we can do to alter this is what we kind of want to do is let's make the noise and some of these things kind of switch through, right? So we have our little snare here, but let's say we want to adjust like the amplitude of our noise and like how this pushes in and out. And first of all, let's fix this a little bit. So in our render network, or in our actual camera, we are going to go view for our camera. We're going to switch this to orthographic. And you can see within this, it's now pushed up to the side. So we're going to go to the bottom left. And this is where we kind of have to like finesse a little bit of our settings. Let's just make sure, did we change this? We did not. So we have to go into our render, and we are going to switch this off of our res. Before we start altering things and then realize we're way off, we're going to change this to this and change this to this. So now we're in 512 space, right? So we have our image down at the bottom, but we want to make it kind of fill this out. And so in my camera, I'm going to keep playing with these numbers, And I'm going to change this to, let's say 1, because I know specifically that kind of like fills it out. And your window size 1. So sometimes you can play with these numbers and then switch this. But I happen to know that these two work because obviously I already made this tutorial. So again, it's just kind of playing through some things and seeing what we want to do. Okay. So as we go back into our noise, and now you can see as we play with our amplitude, it's going to stretch the image or push the image in 3D space like we kind of saw before based on like what the amplitude of it. So it's kind of like altering that a little bit, like almost like a pixel displacement. Because it's really the pixels are just moving in 3D space and they're kind of like pushing themselves off each other, right? So they're creating some depth into it. And then we just like, just want to kind of like switch that. Same with our exponents. It's going to be like how much of this is going to be pushed off. How we change our spreads and things like that, right? So this is great. And what we can also do is, so we want to take these same values that we have up here and we want to start to like kind of switch those things out and get like our from our snare to also do some other things. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go off of here and wait, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm actually just going to add it and add a timer. And every time the snare hits, I want this to reset or start this timer. So timers are great because they're actually doing something. Again, they're doing something, as you'll see. So once we hit this, anytime the snare hits, it's going to start this timer. So it's going to give, I'm going to use this as a little bit of a level for our amplitude or a number set for amplitude. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to add a select just so I have like a clean thing here, and I'm going to use timer fraction because I just want that part of it. I'm going to take these. I'm going to slide them over to create some room in my network. I am then going to add a math here. And then I'm going to add a, guess what? No. Right? So we understand kind of like what's going on here. And maybe, you know what, just to be housekeeping's sake, we're going to do a little rename here. So we know like how we're adjusting our things, right? In our rename, I'm going to call this amp because I know I'm going to be adjusting the amplitude with it. And maybe I should spell it like that. Okay. So if we go into our noise, we take this, we drag this onto our amplitude. Now it's pushing our image, right? And the other thing too is we want to also make sure is that we are pushing all this data in different things. So someone asked in class too about looking at the pixel formats and like what are all these different things and what do they do. So you can see like this was looking a little grainy. So if I add 32-bit float, then I'm getting a little bit of a more color spread. And so this is what I'm looking for, right? I want it to be a little bit crisper and to kind of adjust things like that. Okay, so we have that going. And we are going to, let's see, we don't need to see all this stuff. I'm just going to kind of close some of these things out. But I don't want this to be pushing to that length, right? So I'm just going to go into my range of my math here. And I know kind of what I was looking for. So I'm just going to say, like, let's say 0.7. And so I just want it to kind of bump, or maybe 0.3, right? So like a small little shift. And this is, again, it's just playing with that. And then that would be playing with our noise and our values and our noise to say, okay, how much do we want it to push, right? So these are two different things that you can adjust to get what you're kind of looking for. So I'm going to leave my exponent at 1 because this is a little bit more like what we were doing with the tutorial. This is another cool thing too, as you see, like within our period, I turned it off. But if you're looking for something to have this other type of effect, this is where you could adjust this. And that's the beauty of TouchDesigner, of making other things that adjust it. Whether you're doing some OSC, whether you're doing something else from our audio that's going to adjust that period. But we're just going to leave it right now of this. And this is what I was looking for. And so we have a lot of different things going on here, but I want to add a couple more. So I'm going to add at the end of this chain another feedback. So in the top, I'm going to select feedback again. And I'm going to take this render and put it into my feedback. At the end of the feedback, I am going to add a level, because this is something I talked about in class, of like creating feedback networks and showing you guys how to do them. Through this feedback, we're going to do it the more traditional way of adding a composite. And I'm going to take this feedback and put it into here, put it into there, or not the feedback, but the render, and I'm going to loop this into itself, right? Clean up my situation here. I'm going to take this component and I'm going to go to over, right? So we're going on top of each other. And I need to then reference this feedback. So I'm going to take this feedback and drag this on top of here. And then there you see, there's the reference, right? So everything got cleaned back up again. Now, since we're already bumping this feedback down here with the kick, I'm going to do the same thing. And I am going to take this kick and do the resets on this feedback. So every time the kick is hitting, it's now pulsing like that. So we have like a consistent pulse with the kick, right? In our level, this is where you can start messing with like, you know, some different like values of like, do I want this to have a little bit of a different opacity when I'm doing a feedback? You know, this is a situation where if you wanted to do something like, if I move this out a little bit, and at the end of my level, I add a transform. And I just look at this scale and I add like 0.9. It is then, you can kind of see like it's shifting in space. It's kind of given this like little square because it's really like feedbacking again on itself and, you know, doing things like that. So that is great, right? What I also showed in this example is kind of putting a mask over this. And this is just another resource so you know how it works. And then we're going to clean up a couple things. But so what you can do is if you add a matte, and we drag this into the first node, drag this into the second one, we are going to kind of like create this matte over it, right? So what I'm going to do is then I'm going to take a circle. I'm going to reference this or plug these into this node. And now I have like a circle, right? So this is where you can kind of change how you want it to look and different things like that. But in the circle, the great thing about this is you can turn polygon on. And then you can create what you want here, right? So I could create some polygons. I could do some other things. I'm going to make a square. And within that, we can adjust our borders like I showed in the example, change our size, and then so like really different types of things. Add a little bit of softness. So the biggest thing is I want this to be obviously a little bit bigger in the frame since I'm cutting things out. So this is, again, playing with numbers and saying what works. And let's see, how much do we want to fill it? Let's go 6.5. Let's split the difference there. So we're kind of creating a frame on this, right? And then this is, again, if you wanted to create like a little bit of like a softness on this. So we have that. The other thing too is like cleaning up some of this background. And someone asked me in class about, because right now this is pushing like transparently, but I'm also using my own drawings and stuff like that. So it's pushing like on a background. And this is where if your background doesn't look like mine, which mine is set to black, you could comp over the background, and then that would basically be black behind it. So easy fix here to put everything over black, right? The other thing too is we want to see these spots or these spaces in there within this this transform. We can basically in here for our active add A. And this is like kind of changing a little bit of the alpha in there, right? So like, again, how we're pushing stuff out, and how like it looks within space and the colors that are looking in space and things like that, right? So this is it. So this will conclude this little thing that we're doing with some images, and we're using another component obviously that we made before with our movie player, and doing some different things based on audio analysis and bumping that again based on the music. And this is again where you can kind of switch with this and say like, how much do I want it to go? And you could get into 3D land and start to really play with this and how it's looking. But mine is the idea of more this kind of like particle picture per se. So that is what we got. And that will conclude this tutorial.